Next, under the principles of report, we have 2 reports. The first of 2 reports is the Lacrosse Report that will be given by Dave Mannon, Assistant Principal of Student Affairs, and Tom Doman, former Assistant Principal of Athletics. And after completing a second year of as a probationary lacrosse club with volunteer sponsors at RB, the building administration is here tonight to present a proposal for the board's consideration to make the lacrosse club an RB sport and a JV sport for the spring of 2019. So the report begins on page 16 of board book, and at this time I'll turn it over to Dave and Tom.
And just so the audience is aware, this is the first presentation the board's receiving about establishing an official lacrosse program at Riverside Brookfield High School. There will be no vote taken tonight since it has to be on the agenda for 48 hours as a voting item, as a new business item. So this will take some time over the summer. Our next meeting will be in July if the board chooses to vote on it. The earliest it can be voted on will be in July.
All right, thank you, Kristen. As Kristen stated, we're here to propose the lacrosse club integrating into a sport. So within that, a little bit of the background was given already, but I do want to mention that the lacrosse club was established in 2016 out of interest from many of the students in this room today. That was approved as an activity in the fall of 2016 through the help of the volunteers and fundraising. We're able to get off the ground and have our first season, inaugural season, in the spring of 2017. The lacrosse program this May completed its second full season as a school-sponsored probationary club in its hopes of becoming an adopted junior varsity IHSA sport for the 19th season. A little bit of a background about lacrosse and the IHSA. It was adopted within the state series this spring, 2018, for boys, both boys and girls. Currently, participation in the state are 83 boys teams and 59 girl teams. The boys, player information, there are 10 players on the field at all times. Girls, 12. It's a little bit of a different game. And going into our participation numbers here within the past 2 years, spring of 2017, we had 22 boys on the team. We had 14 girls. Number jumped up in 18 to 40 boys and 15 girls. Our competition schedule, boys played 8 games in 17 and the girls played 8 as well. However, some of those got canceled, so I think they ended up with 3 or 4. The spring of this year, the boys played 10 games, the girls played 6. Some of our opponents included Lake Forest, Antioch, Fenwick, Hinsdale, so some of our surrounding schools in the area. The girls, Geneva, Hampshire, they traveled up west and north, Glenbard West, Hinsdale Central, and Marist. We did send out an activity survey at the end of the year to all of our students in the school, and of the respondents, 168 said they would be interested if lacrosse became an IHSA sport at RB. A couple of reasons for that. There is more of a presence, as you see here in the room tonight. Lacrosse is out there. It's an emerging sport in the state, and the participation numbers are there across many schools, and they're rising. So that's one. 2, the state series is big for students as well. Seeing that it is an adopted IHSA sport at the school would entice some students to come out for that as well as the cost. Right now, our students are mainly purchasing their own equipment. We have some equipment that we purchased for them, but their sticks, their gloves for the boys, the helmets, the pads. It is a costly sport. We've been lucky to fundraise a little bit and get a couple of community donations that has helped the program out here. So we're able to buy some sets, some kits, some competition kits. So we're able to provide some sticks, some goggles, almost all goggles for the girls team. For the boys, are protective gear. The boys are equipped. Every boy needs to wear a helmet. Girls, they wear goggles. All the boys need to wear shoulder pads. They wear arm pads, gloves. And so some of that we've been able to purchase, but it is expensive. So on top of the equipment costs and just participating, so we're able to cover transportation costs and administrative costs, it is expensive. So becoming an IHSA sport, if the school approves this, then it would cut down a little bit on the associated costs for each family.
Explain that. Cost the same amount of money, I assume, to run a team next year as it did last year. So why are you saying it's less of a cost for the families? I mean,
So-
the school is gonna pay for more of it?
Yes.
Okay.
So looking at, if we want to move into the next page there, it's 20. The proposal is to approve two paid coaches, one for the girls team, one for the boys team, and they would be competing on a JV level for the next 2 seasons. And then we'd review the status there and declare at varsity designation after that to see where we're at with participation numbers, to make sure we can sustain where we're at currently with numbers. Lacrosse program again would declare a junior varsity participation level. The district would adopt transportation costs, operation, protective equipment costs. Protective equipment costs for the boys again are the shoulder pads, the helmet, the gloves, the arm pads. For the girls team would be the goggles, so sticks, things like that, helmets. Helmets would be considered a protective item, but mainly the sticks would be purchased for each student on their own. Again, we'll gauge our participation operating costs for the next 2 years. And then currently there's $8,376 in the lacrosse activity account, and that would be used to offset some of the costs and turned over to the district if approved.
Before we jump into the cost, the one thing that we're asking for is to declare IHSA eligibility to compete at the JV level. So one of the other reasons why the schedule is for the girls was 6 and boys was only 10 too, not only cost for transportation and officials, but we had a very hard time finding other schools that would play us because we weren't considered an IHSA organization or sport, and other schools were. So those schools were looking to play primarily other schools with that designation.
Go back to the, on the boys page. I know in our preliminary discussions under equipment expenditures, yeah, I'm sorry, Mary Ann, page 21. You had talked about, for the boys, they were arm pads, gloves. So the helmets, because of the concussions, and the shoulder pads, which are 2 things that we provide, similar to football. But lacrosse is kind of like baseball in that most kids bring their own bats, or they have their own glove. If they play first base, maybe they buy it. So, is there a way where we can provide it looks like on your report, kind of contradicts what you mentioned. It looks on the report, you're asking for the board to pay for the shoulder pads and helmets, but I don't see a mention about the sticks or gloves or that. Are you assuming then the students would buy their own, just like we do for kind of baseball?
That is normally what schools have done in, sports like softball, baseball, any tennis, badminton, anything they're usually holding a racket or something, a golf club, that's purchased by the individual and their families for the feel of things. And so that's typical of all high schools, I think, and most sports that have related.
So tennis gets, but we don't provide tennis rackets.
No, we do have some for badminton and tennis, like a few for beginners that maybe come in and are completely novice, but that's very rare. They usually immediately channel their own rackets, and obviously softball and baseball have had bats for years.
And so the logic of the helmets and shoulder pads, though, is the conditioning and the liability issue to make sure that everybody's playing with a concussion-safe helmet.
Yeah.
So there's some consistency.
Most of the schools that we surveyed were either obviously checking helmets and shoulder pads at the end and looking to see where they were repaired and then moving forward. So that was the most common thread, was that they were providing resources for those safety issues that they didn't want to leave alone to the individual families because they weren't sure which helmets they may buy.
Is there any reason why girls don't have to wear helmets on your list?
Well, the game is
that an
different.
oversight or
No,
girls?
No, the
They're
girls, the
different
game
rules.
is different, it's a less physical, there's different rules to it, the stick is not used in a similar fashion.
They wear goggles.
I don't know anything about
They
it.
wear goggles. They don't wear
So,
helmets.
I wanted to talk about that, because I don't necessarily agree with that. What is the future of the sport? It seems to me like girls aren't going to helmets. It's the 5th largest concussion sport of all sports. Women's lacrosse, behind hockey and football.
I mean, it
And
could,
boys lacrosse.
it could go there,
girls
and maybe
soccer.
it should, but it's like,
I think
currently
didn't-
it's
didn't-
not that way, yeah.
The state of Florida went there, right?
I'm not sure about that.
I think
No.
Brown University went that way. I don't want it to be hung up. I'd rather put the money in there than not. What are the cost of helmets? And let's talk about that as being a leader, right? I mean, I don't want to get into micromanaging the girls lacrosse team. If you don't want to wear helmets, that's something you guys can figure out. But I don't want it to be a cost issue, why we're not wearing helmets, right?
No, it's not a cost issue.
Yeah, well, and that's
at this
absolutely, I wanted to make that very clear.
And actually, I think
Rather
if you look under the.
budget for it.
Yeah, the girls' sheet, the page 20, because the only protective gear that they're required to wear is the goggles, we thought that should be the district's expense, similar to the helmet. I mean, so eventually, if it went to helmets, we'd have to eventually somewhere down the line budget that in, but we budgeted in the goggles for now.
We go by what the IHSA's guidance is on this, and since it just was adopted, I think they're still working out some kinks as well. Do know that there's a goalie though for the girls team, and we do have complete sets for them. They do wear complete headgear and padding and things like that as well, and we do have those sets already purchased. Same with the boys as well. So the expenditures for students individually would be roughly $175 out of their pocket. That includes sticks, gloves, and arm pads. And then assuming that the district would take on the helmet and the shoulder pads for those protectives. And then we already have 13 helmets purchased. We'd be looking at around 22 to add on. And those are similar to football helmets. They're nationally certified, and those would be resurfaced as needed. We'd probably have a company come in and review the status of those, and if they need to be resurfaced, they would bring those on, but 3-4 years, something like that. So
Could you take a step back? If it's declared as a junior varsity, they do allow seniors to play still when you do that,
Yes.
right? So it doesn't matter if there's some juniors
correct.
this year, right?
And we checked with the IHSA and
I was
the-
asking for a different reason. You said there were 40 players this year. You're only budgeting for 35 sets of equipment for next year. Do you know the number's going to go down next year? And
I
you're
don't know.
allowed to have 40 players, right? So
Yeah,
why are
but
we
you-
budgeting for 35 sets?
Right, you look at the playing time and the amount of students, so maybe we need to cap that number too.
Okay.
Unless we go to 2 teams, and then you're gonna, expect an additional cost there for equipment.
So for
that's why we
next
went
year, what
35.
is our plan? We're going to limit it to 35 players?
That would be expected,
Okay,
just so that we can get enough players on the field
okay.
for the price of, participating.
And you got to address supervision with one coach.
Well, that's was my other point is, even with 35 players, is one coach enough coach for a team?
It's a lot to take on.
I don't
not
think we have
only-
any other sports that we have one per, except for maybe cross country.
And cross country, and sometimes when the water polo was on the
Water polo did that.
bubble, that's what happened when girls' water polo moved up with numbers. So, yeah, those are always, as the popularity increases. Also, if the skill level is there and the number of kids does grow, there's an option to play 6 varsity games in there instead of JV, call them varsities, and you could actually then move to a varsity potential state tournament, qualification too. So you have some flexibility once you're in and declare on the IHSA, site.
And since we haven't checked that box yet to declare IHSA eligibility, we have been playing more of like a freshman sophomore schedule, and it's been very difficult to schedule these games out. Schools see that we're not designated as IHSA, so they're more apt not to play us then. They don't want that to count on their official score. They play it's almost counted as a scrimmage, and so declaring it will help definitely shore up some games. We're looking at 7 home, 7 away for both teams next year. And then to your point, for the coaches, we've been fortunate to have some volunteers from the community that came through, and if we could continue that, phenomenal. But we obviously look at adding coaches in the future going forward.
What's the minimum number of girls that you need for a team? So you had 14 2 years ago and 15 this year?
Yeah,
Like, what's the minimum that you would need to have a team?
Well, 12 is on the field, but, that's obviously the bare minimum would be 12. But, at 15, there's a lot of sports that carry, sometimes softball teams are at levels of 15 or 14 and, are playing.
But they only have 9 players at a time.
Right, but it's 2 or 3 over, but, they've competed at that level. I think there will be an increase with that, just because of the support level. That would be a natural thing, and then having it as a sport. I think a lot of students, they have that aspiration to be on a sport, and if they haven't made another sport or aren't playing, they will come from maybe another sport. So these won't all be new kids. They won't be, 40 new boys and 20 new girls, if that's what we get. There'll be a mixture of some athletes that were on other teams. So that's part of the puzzle, but it will happen.
And the students that are coming up from, 2009 to 14, it's a 70% increase in participation rates in the lacrosse program. So our kids aren't here yet that have been really immersed with this sport. We did a table at our Future Bulldogs night and inundated with, incoming freshman students that want to play the sport. So as this word keeps, growing, as the program's name gets out there, and we declare, if we declare IHSA eligibility, I think that's going to help our numbers as well.
When I met with the administration and some representatives from the lacrosse club prior to this board presentation, obviously, as a checks and balances to run through superintendent first and run through principal, the logic that we came upon about bringing this to the board was starting with a JV level for 2 years to, one, get in the IHSA pipeline, but two, we went 2 years as a volunteer club. So we thought the next phase, because this is, as your superintendent being here 7 years, this is the first time we've added a brand new sport under my leadership. And so my thought process with this and with the group that I met with was, okay, they did 2 years as a volunteer club. So if we did 2 years as a JV sport, that would, if we had 4 years of data to show consistent participation, 2 years at an IHSA level, then 2 years from now we can possibly consider adding either a varsity level or 2 levels and the second coach, or continue funding it. If the participation dropped significantly or we had trouble fielding a team, that would be something that we would bring to the board and say, we may consider just leaving it as JV sport, or putting it on hiatus for 2 years. So
Let me ask two other questions. One concern is it really only going to cost what you're saying here? You're talking about maybe the varsity, maybe another coach, that's another $8,000 or whatever it is for another coach, presumably for the boys. The other problem I have is what if we only get 10 girls next year? I assume we can't field the team then. Then we have a Title IX problem. Can we add boys and not add girls?
I don't believe it's a Title IX problem. We're trying to, as long as you're soliciting and trying to have it, and it's open for participation. Whether or not they come or not is not the determining factor. I went through an OCR investigation, and mainly it's the publication and the information, the availability, it's there. And if they didn't come for some reason, we'd obviously have to keep our communication lines open, keep recruiting, and for lack of a better word, keep trying to promote it.
we talked a little bit about the having a cut level for the boys. And we have done that with water polo, wrestling, soccer. We added stipends after we showed 2 years of data where they used a paid coach and a volunteer coach, and they had enough data to show that they could run 2 separate schedules. The board has added stipends on previously in the past. So that was my logic of going with 1 and 35 and maybe having a cap and then having a volunteer assist.
I got to tell you, that doesn't make sense to me, not to. If you allowed 40, and what if 37 kids, boys, come out? You're going to cut 2 because that's a minor effect on the budget. Why would you? Does it really make a difference if you're a coach whether you have 35 or 40 players?
Well, I think
They both sound a lot to me.
Sports that you're cutting on, like in volleyball and basketball, there's a limited amount of playing spaces. So sometimes keeping extra and extras sounds good on paper, lots of numbers, but you also don't have, they're not getting the attention, so to speak.
Why does the IHSA allow 40 players then? That's what you said in your presentation.
We can have as many as we want.
Oh, I
can
thought
run
it said it
two.
was
No,
limited
there's-
to 40 somewhere.
Oh, we were doing that for supervision, like
Okay.
maximum
Yeah, it was, you could have as many as you want, it's like cross country, you could have tons of people sitting on the bench.
Oh, it's-
Until a state tournament, then they'd limit your amount on the bench, but.
Hey, it says the lacrosse program declares IHSA eligibility complete on junior varsity level, and then parentheses maximum participate for each team will be 40 athletes. I just assumed those were tied together to IHSA.
Yeah,
was
no,
saying
that's,
that. Okay,
that's-
I got you.
I would love to run two teams, but then that's an additional cost then.
And how many players were on at a time?
10. For
10,
both.
so if you have
Yeah.
35 players.
Yeah, it's gonna be
they-
hard to keep
okay.
those, 35 in games if you have that many.
And again, we wanted to come to the board with a reasonable proposal so that we didn't, overwhelm the board with requests. and then not have the data to show it. So, that's why we were saying, hey, if we can come on as a JV team, we may come back to you next year and say, hey, we had to cut 10 boys and we had a full season, we could have went to the club, and we could add a coach after that. What I would hate to do is add 2 coaches and not have the participation.
Right.
As a sport, can we do on the field what we have done in the past? Or do we have to actually permanently mark the 2 different field layouts?
So the boys and the girls field are
different.
completely
Right.
different. The boys is more of a couple circles, they call them creases, and the girls have more of an arc for their crease, and so you would have to look at, I know like Lombard South, for instance, they have some temporary washable like paint that they put down on their field, the turf that washes away. But again, you have to look at the liability on the turf and if we could even do that. So I know we have some room at different parks, and it's something we can investigate as well, so look into those options.
Where do
But
you
there
intend
is,
to- So you don't know where you're gonna play the home games next year?
so what we did this year is we marked out the field here,
Okay.
next to the southeast lot.
Okay.
And it's not to a T, the dimensions, but the HSA is pretty flexible with what they provide. But going forward, we'd want something permanent that we could put down, whether that's going to a park and having that laid down on a permanent basis, but that would be more cost effective than marking your field up.
The bigger dimensions can be a little bit altered, the goals obviously, and the size of that scoring area has to be detailed, but,
And boys and girls are both spring sports?
yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, that's one of the dilemmas all schools face moving into lacrosse. Was the spring is very busy, and now it's, another outside sport with weather, and that's some of the reason why some of these games, especially this year, we all know the spring just completely socked a lot of teams in areas where.
Well, they showed a lot of dedication because they would have to practice after the soccer, right? So they were here at 7:30, 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock, weren't they?
Which would be another thing that they would be worked into a
Right, right.
rotation to it, as fair as you can do with spring sports, and everybody, gets their shot at each area.
So we've had some obstacles to overcome here, just the financial aspect of getting this up and running. We did it within 1 year, so that shows you the amount of dedication from the community and from these kids. And I know Glenbard South, it took them about 5 years to get up and going. For us to do it, this was presented to me in the fall, and we got it up and running. We played games in the spring of last year. It was pretty phenomenal through donations, fundraising,
Well,
things like that.
yeah, we see the activity from the parents were really supportive, getting the outside donation. It went up to like $25,000 at one point, right? And it paid for stipends and
Yep.
very supportive group
We-
out there, isn't it?
Yeah, and we're able to get quite a bit of equipment too, and get some volunteer coaches to dedicate their time was huge. And so that's why I think that
And
this,
as it becomes a sport, they can actually go to the boosters, and maybe the boosters will actually talk to them this time.
right,
Yes.
that's the goal. And we already have, some items on that list too. But just from what you say, the dedication from our kids, the ability to overcome all these obstacles, practicing late, scheduling, and getting these games going, equipment things. So I see this as a thriving sport. It's very popular in the area. I think the participation rate's going to go through the roof here in these local schools.
Well, then you have a home game last year, and what was the attendance in the stadium?
A couple hundred at least, yeah.
So, one thing we've looked at in the past is, Wes asked the question, what sports are we gonna suck players out of by putting this in as a spring sport?
Right.
So,
Well,
That's what you-
there's no guarantee
kids can play
where
once.
they're going. We don't know for sure where they're coming from. There is a tendency for certain types of athletes to play the different sports and stuff
Right.
like that. But yeah, that's always a concern of all the sports, is that they'll lose some players here and there. But again, it's again, people's choice, kids'
I
choice.
understand it, but I'm asked, that's not an answer to the question. What sport is it likely that we're gonna draw players if we didn't have lacrosse from next spring?
For boys or girls.
Do them
Well,
separately.
for
if they're
boys,
separate.
football has tended to be one of the primary lacrosse, so that doesn't really change football, just
Right.
brings them.
No, what spring sport? Are we gonna lose kids in different spring?
I would say
sports?
there'd probably be some track kids, because their speed is an option.
Okay.
If you were a baseball kid sitting on the bench, I don't know the thought process, what you would think,
Okay.
A girl soccer who's not playing, it's a speed sport, so the people who can run, tend to do and have a better chance at competing.
I think on the plus sides too, there's so much research about varying your sports as an athlete, not being sports specific, and this offers another opportunity for your fellow athletes to get involved if they're not involved, if they're just in the weight room. Well, now you're out there doing something extra, gaining some eye-hand coordination, things like that. So, yeah, we may lose a couple to softball or to track, but I think we're going to gain on the plus side so many more 2 or 3 sport athletes because of it too.
The other schools indicated that backups in other sports who sought maybe a starting role, that tended to be happening, that some kids that weren't playing as much as they wanted to did move over. And so thinned out things. It didn't eliminate anything. It thinned out some of the depth in some of the sports.
So, I mean, because one thing we look at, what's gonna cost us about $20,000 if we fund full sports, right? And we look at, when we're spending money on clubs in sports to increase the participation. So it sounds like we'll increase the participation, we'll probably lower the participation, at least partially, in a couple other sports. So overall, we're not gonna pick up
I would
Maybe, maybe not. I mean,
roughly, I'd say
50,
half, you know.
about half, so
Yeah.
we'll pick up like
Yeah,
25.
there's gonna be some that already played something, you know.
The other thing is when we've had to look tightly at our budget in the past and had to consider cutting sports, when some of us came on the board, we looked at how we compare to other schools and what sports and clubs we make available, and we're already way at the top of the list on how many sports we make available, right?
Yeah, and what
In our
we-
conference, yeah.
we are, and what we did to prepare for this is Tom sent out kind of a survey to all the schools in his network, and I don't know how many schools you had on that list.
It was probably 30 to 35 that responded accurately, and again, it was one, I think they all took baby steps, so to speak, kind of like we did, and then as they progressed, then they went to the protective gear, and some have still had, you know, a transition for, like how they pay for the coaches and things like that, but I think the main concern was the safety and the supervision, which are the 2 major costs that are proposed here.
And if this is a sport, let's say we had 8 women who wanted to play next year, girls, can they play on the boys' team for lacrosse or
No,
not?
because there's a like sport of their kind.
Okay. So if we make a decision, we're going to do this, and we approve a coach stipend, do we have to pay the coach even if we don't have enough players to play on the girls' team?
That would be a
I would-
union question.
I would
don't
say
think
no.
answers.
Okay.
I would say as long as they have enough notice, I would say no, or we would only be responsible for a portion.
Okay.
I would think that a lot of the people in the audience today, if they thought the board was seriously considering this for July, would make it a good point to make sure that there was enough girls and boys to participate if.
Well, it sounds like we're gonna have, I
you
mean,
know.
if we had 35 or 40,
Yeah,
we
I-
probably could do it pretty
Yeah,
easily with 20.
I don't think anybody
right?
would be here if they didn't think the numbers were moving in the right direction and just didn't want to be caught behind.
I think some of the audience members would help recruit though and encourage their friends to try it if it was to become a sport on both levels.
Without any prompting and the results of the survey, and I know it's a survey and you click a box, but that amount of response from just that question is encouraging. So I'm pretty optimistic that this is going to be a thriving program in this school, and it's an engaging, exciting sport, and it's going to be another opportunity to go back to multiple sport athletes, another venue, another opportunity for our kids to get involved here, and that's what we're about. So.
Yeah.
Did we answer all the questions that were submitted? Feel you have
Oh,
your
there's an
questions?
addition, there's a uniform question. Currently, right now, there's only one uniform that's required, and so uniform costs were added, but that's in anticipation of 2022 when you need two sports home and away, or 2 uniforms home and away,
Oh, okay.
jerseys.
So right now, this IHSA only requires 1 color jersey.
Correct.
Are there any other questions from the board?
I think I got all my answers.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.